ANC Head of Policy, Jeff Radebe, says that the party's Integrity Committee has been asked to finalise hearings of those party members implicated in the State Capture Commission of Inquiry report in the next 6 months. Now, this as the party concedes that its capacity to lead has been significantly weakened due to corruption, and that's with an estimated 200 members of the ANC having been fingered for alleged wrongdoing. Now, briefing the media yesterday, Radebe said that work will start in all earnest at the end of August to verify which members must appear before the Integrity Committee after the State Capture Commission's findings that the party permitted, supported and enabled corruption and state capture. Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi is a lecturer from Rhodes University and he joins us now for further discussion on this. Dr. Tselapedi, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
No, thank you. Thank you for the invite and morning to your viewers.
First off, your reaction to Mr. Radebe's sentiments yesterday.
Look, I think I'm not surprised. I think obviously it makes sense that the ANC had to come up with a task team to look at the commission recommendations and to also obviously rationalize it for the state president to look at make some sort of also recommendations for the state. But of course, the recommendations again from the state capture report has some implications for the ANC. So it makes sense that they must do this, and they must be able to formulate a sort of discussion for its own members to have an understanding of what it's trying to do, so that members and leaders of the ANC are not surprised when 2 months later, number of people across the provinces are rounded up into meetings of the ANC, looking at the state capture report.
So the findings were damning. The ANC was said to have permitted, supported and enabled state capture. That is really dire. So where do they start as a party to digest that?
Look, I think it's common cause that obviously the ANC facilitated a lot of the state capture that was happening, or a lot of the state capture phenomenon that was happening in the state. But you know, this is not obviously a phenomenon that specifically happened in the last 10 years or so. I think that's been something that's been ongoing for a while. If you look at obviously at local level or local government level, where, for example, supply chain managers will give to their family members or make sure that their family members are given easier access to accessing tenders and so on. I mean, those are instances where families of people working in the state are allowed to capture the state in a way that benefits quite small number of people. So I think that era, that period prior to the 10 years that we're talking about, facilitated the possibility of the state capture phenomenon. And I think it wouldn't be difficult, I think, for ANC members and leaders to understand that they facilitated that. I think really for me, the issue for the ANC is to impose rule of law, to understand that leaders generally impunge the image of the ANC when they involve themselves in such acts. And the ANC has a legal recourse to be able to rein in on its leaders and membership who are involved in such acts, over and beyond the issue of the step-aside rule. So I think there's a lot of ground. I don't think there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done in convincing leaders and members of what needs to be done. I think quite a lot of people understand that inside the ANC. I just think they need to be able to impose their rules on leaders and ANC that are involved in such acts.
So who is supposed to impose that on whom? Looking at the ANC, looking at how entrenched this corruption is, starting right from the branch levels to the top. Who's supposed to then oversee this? Who in the ANC has the moral integrity to preside over such?
Look, I think the thinking for the ANC around the Integrity Commission was an attempt to do precisely that, to obviously remove NECP, CSRCs and BCs, them from processes that would effectively adjudicate on its own members, that obviously preside in all of those structures of the ANC. Obviously, the Integrity Committee recommends, it does not impose or force its view on the NEC. It recommends to the NEC. So that's part and parcel of the limitation, of course, of that committee. But it's obviously a difficult one, and the ANC is going to be in a bind. It's almost like one person who's themselves been being alleged to be involved in corruption, then adjudicating on their own colleague, whether at an NEC level or at the PEC level. So I think it will be difficult, and that's why you get a lot of sentiment, particularly when you look at the KZN Provincial Conference. People saying that the step-aside rule is selective. Why is it this leader does not get to be rained on, but another leader gets to be rained on? So I think given the systemic levels of corruption within the ANC and their impact on government, certainly you're always going to find a lot of, there's always going to be a constituency within the ANC that's aggrieved over this and that implementation of this decision. And I think that's going to be a lot of, in a lot of ways, the unwinding or the unbundling of the ANC for a long time to come.
Dr. Tselapedi, you've engaged with the document. What impression do you get of the party's actual grasp of the gravity of its role in state capture?
Look, man, I think, there's an understanding in the document of the for a long time what's been coming in the ANC from since the 1997 Mafikeng Conference of the ANC, when Nelson Mandela did talk about corruption and the sort of growing phenomenon in the ANC and people just using it for career and to attain certain lifestyles. So that's quite clearly articulated, and they then enter the sort of 10-year period, the Gupta phase, and this sort of family imposing the tentacles into the state and repurposing the state, and specifically capturing policy-making decisions or processes of the state. So I think in terms of the understanding of their own location within the problem of state capture is there. I think there's equally then an understanding of there must be systemic changes, but in terms of the prescriptions to me don't quite accord to the systemic changes that they also speak to. And I think there's, in a sense, now, broadly speaking, and I think what's sort of gaping in the argument, and I don't think it's discussed as such, is there's this sort of understanding that, well, there's corruption as well in society, there's corruption as well in the ANC, but the ANC now needs to sort of embed itself into society. Controversially speaking, I think part of the problem is that you have a society that's quite democratic and capitalist, but you have an organization that equally wants to be democratic and involve itself in community struggles. I think the ANC is unable to insulate itself away from some of the excesses that you find in society. It's unable to do so. And I think part of the problem is that it wants to embed itself in the society in the same way, but think that it can absolve itself of some of the problems that it finds in society. So in a sense, the ANC is not able to be an independent arbiter on issues of transformation, on issues of development. And I think for me, that was the glaring part about the document. And I don't think there's sort of any grappling with that, one, at the systemic level, two, I think at the detailed level, programmatically for the ANC.
And the party says that this document is not presenting the position of the organization, but rather to serve as a guide for discussion. So which discussions do you still need, given that you've already had a commission that spent about R1 billion and has obviously done extensive work and research following on work that had already been done by other inquiries, be it at Parliament or at some of these state entities themselves. So what discussions still need to be had here?
Look, I suppose part of why one wants to say that it's a discussion document for members, for rank and file and leadership of the members of the ANC, is so that you bargain and convince the ANC towards policy conference and towards the elective conference. I mean, we've just recently witnessed the ANC KZN Provincial Conference. And some of the articulations there around law and politics, and that some judges really are comrades and are not independent jurists. And so it's quite clear that moving to the discussions, at least for the ANC, people are not wholly convinced around some of the issues around our constitutional democracy, what should be the way forward with regard to the rule of law, blah, 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 blah. And part of my understanding of that document, which is why I think there's a sort of historical grounding or historical narrative of where the ANC comes from with the issue of corruption and where is it now and what should be the position of the ANC. Part of that, obviously, is to say that there has been all of these efforts on the part of the ANC. There has been all of these things that the ANC has observed both in the organization and the state, and that there must be some sort of rule of law imposed. So I think it's just part of the bargaining of the ANC among the provinces to make sure that they have a peaceful policy conference and elective conference in December.
So, sticking to that point, the ANC says despite various measures taken by the party itself and government to combat corruption, there is still widespread perception, the ANC says, it's widespread perception that little or no progress has been made to ensure accountability. So let's just tap into that. Is that a reality or is that a perception that there's been little to no progress in order to combat corruption?
Look, I think, there's a lot of corruption. At least we can say that part of the perception that they're observing, I think, is in accordance with what a lot of people face at the local government level, at the provincial level. I mean, if we are day in and day out, we are getting, forget even allegations of newspapers, that we are getting Auditor General reports year in, year out around the issues of water, around the issues. Just recently of the health department, quite a lot of health officials in government have been gaining from the 350 rands grants. I mean, these are people who are working for the state or for the government. So I think for a lot of people on the ground, the issue of development has not been a good story to tell. The issue of our roads, the issue of the sanitation services in this country have been quite bad, whether you look at Bloemfontein and what's been happening with local communities taking control of state services or municipal services. So I think for a lot of people, the perception is the reality. And I think part of my, disappointment with reading the document of the ANC is that it wants to think that, well, the ANC government has been doing quite a lot, but now we're still left with this sort of perception that there isn't much that's been done. But the reality is that, no, that's not the case. And I think part of the problem for the ANC is that when people are talking about corruption, it may be thinking at the national level and to an extent provincial level. But a lot of the people experience corruption at local government level. And I think part of the problem for the ANC is that they're unable to rein in on that.
So, Dr. Tselapedi, reading this document, do you get the sense that the ANC is at all serious about following through and meaningfully so on the recommendations of the Commission? And I ask this because the party, for instance, goes on to say that the findings and recommendations of the Commission actually gives it an opportunity to enhance renewal. So, I mean, the ANC doesn't need a report of a commission of inquiry that cost this country R1 billion to focus on renewal. Shouldn't it have started on that process separately and a long time ago, rather than telling us now that this is an opportunity for renewal, it being presented with this report?
Yeah, look, I think the issue of renewal has been a sort of long-running theme of the ANC for a very long time, for over 10 years. I think it's sort of a catch-all phrase for any sort of thing that may look like it's a change to the organizational processes of the ANC and therefore necessarily progressive. I don't think that's the case. Two, I think we are at a point in this country where you can no longer judge the ANC by what they say, not necessarily, but by what they do. And when we talk about the ANC, we're not talking about NEC level or cabinet at national level. Really, we're talking about local government, because I think that's where the rubber hits the road for most people. Three, and finally, I think the ANC does have an indecisive leadership, specifically also in the presidency. President Cyril Ramaphosa is not the most decisive, I think for him, it's about making sure that there is unity inside the ANC. But I think part of the problem there is that you can't operate in a political environment, if not organizational environment, where there's such divisive, unequal, and I think just sort of splitting issues when it comes to policy, when it comes to the ethics around rule of law and constitutionalism, and just doing the work of the state. So I don't think the ANC is genuinely going to do much about the recommendations. But of course, this is highly speculative. But given that track record, the ANC, in my mind, is not going to do much. And this is just one of the ways in which it's just part of the discourse of renewal for them. And it lends itself to sort of a marketing tool when it comes to elections.
So as we wrap this up, Dr. Tselapedi, the party talks about intentions to self-correct. It talks once again about lifestyle audits for its members and their families. We've heard this before. We've heard this numerous times from the ANC. Yeah. And if the ANC says that the impact of state capture has been devastating on South Africa's socioeconomic well-being, and it agrees that at least between 2010 and 2018, the triple threat, the joblessness, the inequality has worsened in South Africa. It agrees that SOEs has been hollowed out, state capacity has been impacted adversely, and that it can't perform through these SOEs the developmental roles that the state was supposed to target. How does the party hold itself accountable?
It doesn't. I think what you said is really the ANC declaring that it's unable to govern. It really just boils down to that.
And I suppose this is where we're at. But just a final word in terms of this particular document and whether it inspires any confidence for the ANC and for South Africa at large, Dr. Tselapedi.
Look, I think for me, what would have made me confident, look, the document is uneven in terms of some of the issues it touches on. There are some issues where I think it was quite good. There are other issues where I think it was not too weighty and not substantive. But I think for me, the core issue is that the ANC should have been a lot more discerning about, in large part, the problems comes from itself. And I didn't see an in-depth take on organizational processes, actually using them and leveraging them against some of the leaders and members who commit some of these problems in terms of the image of the ANC. I saw in part the language that talked about, well, there are all of these sort of external factors as well that have imposed themselves on the trajectory of the ANC and the state, and have also obviously compromised some of these institutions which should have been doing the work, like the prosecutorial agencies and so forth. But I think I would have wanted to see a lot more at an organizational level what the ANC has done on its members. So no, I don't think in whole the ANC will do much. Like I said, I was not surprised by the document as well. Let's see what they say at the policy conference. But I think as South Africans, we shouldn't be expecting too much from the ANC.
Well, on that note is where we'll leave it. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi. He is a lecturer from Rhodes University and discussing with us the ANC's response to the state capture report, which found that the African National Congress had benefited from state capture and that it had also permitted, supported and enabled corruption and ultimately state capture.